started. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Good morning.
They said louder.
Thank you for coming to the ASC Forum on Scientific Integrity on the last day of the ASC conference and the last hour of the ASC conference. We very much appreciate that you came. My name is Sally Simpson. I am the current president of the American Society of Criminology. And before I let the other panelists introduce themselves, I just want to mention that we received a number of requests from people who wanted access to the conversation today, and so the session is being recorded, just so you know, all right? So let me just go down the line and let them introduce themselves and their positions in ASC.
Hi, I'm Laura Dugan. I am the current vice president of the American Society of Criminology, and I'm also the chair of the Publications Committee.
I'm Daniel Nagin. I'm president-elect of the American Society of Criminology.
Beth Hubner, vice president-elect of the American Society of Criminology.
Okay. The first thing we need to talk about is why are we here? What's the purpose of the ASC Forum on Scientific Integrity, and what do we hope to get out of this conversation? So why are we here? At the end of May in 2019, the editors of Criminology were made aware of potential data irregularities in a paper that was published entitled Ethnic Threat and Social Control, examining public support for judicial use of ethnicity and punishment. The outcome of this review process led to the authors voluntarily asking for a retraction of that paper. This is the precipitating event that led us to set up the forum. However, we are not going to litigate this case. We are not going to discuss this case. We want to talk about moving forward. We want to talk about what ASC can do regarding potential threats to scientific integrity moving forward. So what would we like to accomplish today? First, I think it's important that we talk about what ASC has done thus far. Second, we want to share some ideas and strategies that we have discussed and that other people have suggested as we move forward. And third, we would like to seek your input into some of these ideas and strategies, as well as sharing ideas that you have and suggestions that you have. So that's what we would like to accomplish today. The executive board and leadership of ASC takes academic integrity, scientific integrity very seriously. And we are committed to maintaining the highest standards of quality in our journals, and indeed, ethical standards across the society. So, in that vein, we have, following the recommendations of the Publication Committee, adopted COPE ethics and guidelines principles that will help our journals address incidents of data anomalies and where there are allegations of possible misconduct. These are different situations and circumstances. According to COPE, data should be appropriately analyzed, but inappropriate analysis does not necessarily amount to misconduct. Fabrication and falsification of data do constitute misconduct. So what is COPE? COPE is an organization that was established in 1997, and the purpose was to address breaches of research and publication ethics. And it's a voluntary organization, and it provides its members a forum for discussion and advice for scientific editors of journals. And they do provide guidance on a lot of issues, not just issues of data integrity. For instance, authorship, issues of peer review, issues of conflict of interest, redundant publications, and such. So it's a very broad canvas in which they provide discussion forums and advice for its members. So in that vein, they suggest that there are various responses for different situations. The same situation different situations will require different kinds of interventions. And the ASC Publications Committee is currently drafting a formal protocol for the ASC journals, which include Criminology, Criminology and Public Policy, and the Criminologist, to apply the guidelines to our journals, okay? And here is actually a link that, because we don't have internet, I can't link on it and show it to you, but I know that's a big issue, we're gonna get to that. Anyway, this is for, if you'd like to go and look at the COPE webpage. It is extensive, massive, hard to navigate, but there's a lot of information there. So, the executive board has adopted COPE principles. That's one big step that we have taken. Other ideas and suggestions that we are talking through and considering are whether we should adopt a standing or ad hoc committee on scientific integrity, sponsor joint trainings for especially our division journals where they might need some assistance in learning and navigating COPE, whether the ethics committee should offer workshops at ASC focused around the publication process and some of the challenges associated with the publication process. And we have also, the Publications Committee, and I'm going to turn this over to Laura, has also investigated other steps that other organizations have taken to protect scientific integrity. So I'm going to turn it over to Laura now and let her speak about this.
So one of the other things that we are talking about in the Publications Committee is developing a policy on data archiving and making data accessible for replication purposes. And as many of you probably know, other disciplines have been doing this routinely for many years. And so we our publisher is reaching out to a lot of different journals to get different protocols for different levels of sensitivity of data so that we can set up a policy that our journals, we will submit a proposal at next year's board meeting for our journals to adopt for data archiving and making data accessible for other users. And we are well aware, just from the diversity of the members in the Publications Committee, but also part of today's mission is to get feedback from all of you. We're well aware that people have different restrictions on their data, and we know that there's a lot of different sensitivities. But the thing is that other societies have dealt with these issues, and that there are different levels of data archiving that are made available. So, for example, and I'm not saying that this will be in the proposal, but this will give you an idea of the diversity of opportunities. If you or any of your scholar friends used data that are sensitive, owned by an agency that you cannot share, then what you can do is submit the program that you use to analyze the data and the data to that agency, have them run the tables, and then give the output to the journal just to verify that the data in the program do lead to that. So there are a number of different ways to assure integrity. And we will be looking at all of them. So the Publications Committee is going to be very active this year. As Sally said, not only are we looking at this issue, but we're also we're going to be writing a protocol for using the more than 30 flowcharts that COPE provides, and we're going to be shaping the protocol to match the nuances of our discipline and the needs of our discipline. But we are very committed to doing this, and I'm really proud of everyone on the Publications Committee for being willing to work extra hard this year.
So at this point, I'd like to open it up to the audience for their comments, your ideas, your suggestions, what you think about what the ASC board has done thus far and what we are looking into and investigating. We would really like your feedback.
So because this is being recorded, we would like it if you would come up and use the microphone so that we can have that on recording as well. I can see if there's a way to pull this out, actually. So there's a little bit of mobility.
Okay, please come forward, tell us your issues and concerns. We're taking notes. We're having a board meeting at 12:30 today, and this will be discussed at the board meeting.
So I just wanted to ask, you've mentioned about the adopting the COPE guidelines in general, and I think that's a really good step forward, and I'm very glad to hear that. I just wanted to potentially get some more detail specifically around what's going to happen in future with retractions, if as and when they're needed, and they're quite common in other disciplines, and they're quite common in other journals in criminology. So they will be needed in future at whatever frequency, but I wanted and specifically whether there's going to be any difference in terms of what is applied to things that are published from now on, or what happens if there is a recurrence of the precipitating event here, in that something that's already been published in Crim or Crim Public Policy needs retraction, or the authors ask for retraction in future. Thank you.
I'll let Laura deal with that.
Okay. So, so the COPE guidelines actually offer, as I said, there's a set of flowcharts, and at one end of most of the flowcharts have retraction in it. What typically happens at that point is that so it depends on whether it's voluntary retraction or not. Those are two different issues, and these are things that we're actually going to be talking about as a committee on how to deal with these issues. Obviously, voluntary retraction is a lot easier. That is done through the publisher. So our journals use Wiley, and so so the publishers and the editors would negotiate with what the terms of the retraction are in terms of what is posted on the article website as a statement, and then that would happen. In some cases, the universities of the authors would be involved, and these are some of the things that we would be looking at. So if it's involuntary and if there's concern about about the nature of what happened, then the universities will be contacted, and they would be doing the investigation. And so, but I think the key here is that this is something that we're going to be setting up as soon as we can. We're already members of COPE. We'll be setting up these policies and nuances as soon as we can get them up there. I think one of the things that's going to be most important is that as scholars are uploading their articles, they're going to be told that we are members of COPE, which means that their research is subject to this level of scrutiny. And also, whenever an article is accepted, they also will be told, and so everyone will be well aware that their research is subject to a level of scrutiny and the possible outcomes that if there is anything found that's array. So hopefully there'll be fewer of these cases, but. That's what we know so far, is that the editors will work with the publishers on doing.
Just to clarify, it's going to be the COPE process rather than the process outlined in the email that was circulated.
Yes.
Probably.
So in the interest of the recording, the question was raised, just to be clear, it's going to be the COPE process and not the process that was sent out earlier for what has happened. So as Sally had mentioned at the beginning of this, the purpose of what ASC is doing here is that it became clear that we needed to have a standard set of guidelines because our editors really didn't have that. They had the practice that they had been using and following the comment and responses over an extended period of time, which actually, they did have the COPE guidelines are publicly available, and they did have access to those guidelines, and they followed them accordingly. But what we're doing now is we're going to make sure that it's really clear of what those steps are. And so we're not calling it comment and response because it's not quite that, but because comment and response is set up for something else. But I think in a case it's almost semantics. The authors were given the opportunity to address these things, and then the editors were going to set it up for review. but we are going, the key here is that we're going to be as transparent as possible, as the link that you were unable to see shows. There is a large set of guidelines. It's a little overwhelming. Like I said, there are more than 30, and so the efforts of the Publications Committee is to set up something that's more adaptable to help people navigate those guidelines. And obviously this information is going to be publicly available to not just members, but whoever wants to see. So I hope that was helpful.
Okay, thank you for this panel, first of all. It's very interesting and very important. I'm wondering, what about other criminology journals? You were talking about criminology and public policy, and the criminologist, which is obviously what you have control over, but there are many criminology journals, some of them very, very good. Many of their editors are members of the ASC, some of them very distinguished members. So I'm wondering if we can have some control over what's going on with these journals.
So the short answer is no, but the longer answer is, I mean, we as a board can encourage our division journals to join COPE, but honestly, when we looked at the list of COPE memberships, many of our division journals were members of COPE. I know that the Journal of Crime and Delinquency is a member of COPE, and I believe that JQC is a member of COPE. So this is something, it's actually a pretty low-hanging fruit to be a member of COPE. And I think that what we can do is lead by example, although I suspect we're not leading. Like I said, others had joined previously, but we don't have control over what other editors do and the choices that they make.
There's a question over here.
Thank you. I'm on the editorial board of Homicide Studies, and we brought up that issue this week. And Sage says they're a member of COPE and they have all the flowcharts. The point I wanted to make is I was involved in a similar situation with an article that was published in the Journal of Forensic Sciences. They follow, similar to COPE, because I compared the two, the medical journal editor guidelines. So there's two things from that I think are important for us. First of all is clearly established timelines. Yeah. What we don't want is things going to a black hole. We'll get back to you before 2030, that type of thing. Right. The second thing is the link between whatever is ultimately determined in the original article, because we've seen a number of cases in other disciplines where a completely flawed article stayed on the website. There was no connection to the challenges and to the ultimate retraction. So journalists go and they find this, and then it carries on in its own little world. Thank you.
Good question. We've addressed this.
Yeah, so thank you for raising those issues. We actually have spent a number of months working on a draft of a policy before we realized that we could just join COPE. And two of the issues that were left up for discussion, one was setting a timeline, because we think it's really important, although what we need to realize that if there is an ongoing investigation going on, we need to set the timeline to accommodate that investigation, because obviously we're not going to put a deadline in the middle of an investigation. So that's something to be negotiated, but time will be of the essence, and that's something that we'll be discussing in the Publications Committee. The other thing is that we agree wholeheartedly about if we know for sure that the numbers in the tables are incorrect, then we can put warnings on the website of the journal article, and it'll be right there. So not just on the homepage of the journal, but on the link to the article, so that people can see. It'll be a caution, and then when a decision is made, that will also be posted on that website. So if a correction is then published, it'll be linked to the correction. The thing about journals, which I think is actually a very good thing, is that they once you put a warning up there, it never comes down. But what it does is it creates a historic record of it. And so that's something that we can do easily, and that will be part of our process. And this is a good example of how the nuances of what we want to do as a discipline or as a society will be a little bit different than just the generic guidelines, because the generic COPE guidelines are covering all disciplines. I mean, they even have medical journals that are members of COPE. And our publisher was very clear that we want to make sure that we put some of these rules in place or these decisions in place. And actually, to get back at the comment made earlier about other criminology journals, like I said, the process that we develop is something that will be publicly available, and if it's something that's useful for other journals, they certainly can have it. And also, it's a dynamic process in the sense of, sure, the board will vote on it, but if anyone sees a problem with the process, we will revisit it, because we want to make sure that that we're able to address things that are unforeseen as well.
Hi. Oh, I don't know how to work it. I have two concerns. One has to deal with responding to data issues. And I think data archiving is absolutely the solution, but most journals that have it don't actually do it. And in a comment reply thing, which is the way this was going, it went 4 months without the authors, Brian or Eric, having to give data or output to me. And it was going like that right now. And the journal had set that process up, and I think that if you're going to have a comment reply process, particularly if co-authors involved, a starting line needs to be that they should have to share the data and the output. If you're going to give one side months and months and months to look at it, you should have to do the other. The second is that the key flow chart for COPE is how to respond to whistleblowers. And it says on there that you have to investigate anonymous comments, and you cannot ask them to out themselves. The journal didn't do it. They specifically required the person in one of the emails I saw to identify themselves, and then they shut it down. And I think both of those need to be taken seriously. You got to respond to anonymous comments, and you have to make people share data.
So as Sally had mentioned at the beginning, we're actually not going to be evaluating and picking apart here what happened over the several months. What I can tell you is that we're going to be addressing all of these issues. The timeline is very important, but if there is an ongoing investigation, we can't violate that investigation. And so if there are data restrictions, we need to honor those data restrictions. But what we want to do is make the process as transparent as possible. But the timelines need to follow the rules of the investigations.
Which investigation?
Our so like I said, I don't want to get into.
In the case that an institution is notified that there are data discrepancies and concerns about the data, misconduct, the institutions are notified. And in that case, they will launch an investigation. And as a consequence of that investigation, everything kind of goes on hold until there's a determination of that investigation. So we have to adhere. That's the COPE principles, are that there's a notification, there's an investigation, and then there's an outcome. At the point of the outcome, then the process continues. So that adds time, unfortunately, but it's a fair process.
Yes, ma'am. The only thing, though, is with data sharing, the institution sent an email in early June, on June 6th, that said that Dr. Stewart should share the data. So that does not, in fact, account for why you can't share data. I know you don't want to talk about the case, but you can't develop policy without kind of delving into what happens or doesn't happen. And so there is no university that stops you from sharing data with your co-authors.
Well, again, we're not going to litigate this issue. That's not the purpose of this meeting. It's looking forward to see what we can do as an association, come up with policies and procedures that make sense for our journals. And the issue of data privacy is an issue that we will address with the Publications Committee, because there are data privacy agreements. And I think every institution has their own set of rules and procedures that they have to follow. So again, I don't even know what the University of Maryland, for instance, would require in an investigation like this. It may be that institutions have their own rules and procedures that they have to follow. So
I can also assure you that we are looking at what happened this past year. This is all, the development of the policies moving forward is looking at what worked and what did not work. And we're not closing our eyes to that and ignoring it, but we want to make sure that we have something that's consistent and in place that can guide the process, and that everyone knows what the process is. And there will be periods of times where we don't know what's going on, except we know what stage that things are in.
Other questions, suggestions, ideas, comments? Yes.
Hi, just quickly responding to a couple times mentioning of contacting an institution and they will launch an investigation. So in a couple of other fields, and very recently even, we've seen that actually institutions also sometimes have incentives not to investigate something very properly or fully, often to do with how distinguished the scholar is, because a distinguished scholar is status and prestige and grant money for the institute. And we've seen that actually, even though sort of everyone thinks very clearly that there's really something iffy going on, the actual investigation was not that thorough. And this is not in criminology, but elsewhere. So if the deal is that if this happens, you notify an institution and you just wait for their investigation and that's what we accept, is that good enough? And I'm not familiar enough with COPE to know what happens or what they recommend, and I don't have a solution, and just be aware of that, and I wonder how you think about this.
Anyone want to take a crack at that? I mean, again, this is kind of outside of the purview of what ASC can actually do, right? Every institution has its own process, and in some cases, people aren't affiliated with institutions. In terms of academic institutions, they're affiliated with other kinds of organizations, which may also not have the resources to do a thorough investigation. So, I mean, those are some of the weaknesses that we're aware of. But ASC as an organization is not in a position to be able to launch scientific investigations of its own. We don't have the legal authority to do so, and it makes us liable as well.
Having said that, we can investigate the analysis that went in, the data that went into it. So there are two things here. There's the motive behind what was created, and then there's the what was created and where the discrepancies are and what is the problem. And if there's a complaint, then it's on the onus of the authors to address what the nature of these discrepancies are. So it's not that we're not, part of the COPE guidelines is sending out giving the authors a chance to explain, to reanalyze the data, explain the discrepancies, and then either doing it in-house, depending on what I can't remember the details of all the COPE's guidelines, and I apologize. Like I said, there's more than 30 of them. But there will be an investigation and assessment of that, and it will involve the original complainant. There would be a back and forth in terms of that. But so there will be an investigation on the sense of scientific merit, but the motive behind it is something that's left up to the universities or the institutions of the authors.
But that's at the journal level, right? The investigation of and the back and
Yes.
forth. Yes. That's
Yeah,
at
so
the
that's at the
journal
journal, not the society. But our guidelines are for journals, or
Yeah.
they're for editors, so.
Sorry, one more question. Are human subject concerns covered as part of COPE, or is that a totally separate issue?
They do have policies, I'm sorry. Again, I'm like Laura, I don't know all of the details, but they do have acceptable justifications for not sharing data and unacceptable justifications for not sharing data. And so they, in those classifications, they differentiate some situations and concerns where since you simply can't share the data because of privacy concerns or whatever, and those are acceptable, but as Laura said, there may be means through which you can share scripts and reproduce tables and things without giving away your data per se, because we have, yeah.
Something different.
Oh,
Maybe I
humans,
wasn't clear enough.
okay.
I was never, I know, I'm sorry, I wasn't clear enough. I was never asked by a journal to provide the IRB approval from my university. And I'm wondering if, as long as we're talking about ethics in research, this is part of it, right? So is it addressed?
Oh, that's good. I don't know.
That's something we can address. So I know that some journals do require IRB approvals and documentation of that, and that's something that we can certainly consider. It's a good idea, yeah.
Medical journals often require that it be actually in the article itself.
Yeah.
And I was just going to say, we've been working really closely with Wiley yesterday, and this is a work in progress, and COPE is not just a static thing. So they discussed with us that there are a number of different forums in which we can ask these questions. So I think it's important to note that there's a lot of resources, and as things come up, we can continue to amend this, and we do have an advocate there who can ask questions from other disciplines as well. So.
Yeah.
Another question over here.
Yes.
I share Velter's concerns about the other investigation in the impartiality and independence of universities doing their own. Criminologists for decades have complained about police doing their own internal disciplines, and if we think that we're any better, we're fooling ourselves. Plus, the quality of investigation that a university can mount could be extremely variable. So, we don't want historians and people with English degrees taking a look at the sophisticated metrics and statistical techniques used in other disciplines, and I've seen them actually do that. So in the Journal of Forensic Science situation that I told you about, an investigation was brought up that clouded things. There was no information on who was doing the investigation, what were the allegations of the investigation, what was the outcome of it, and it created a delay which caused a lot of concerns and even threats to the journal's editor. So again, it's all about openness, and I don't know why a university investigation necessarily would have any effect on the determination by a bunch of skilled criminologists whether a particular article is problematic or not. So I see some potential problems with it being used as a smokescreen to delay and cover what's going on in terms of a publication. So if you could just thanks, Daniel.
To this, I've come to this fairly late in the process, so I'm not familiar with the details of all the reason we're here today, but also more importantly with the COPE process and so forth. But I will just make the following observation about this: as I understand it, as Sally pointed out, that sometimes a university investigation will condition the timeline in which our that is the criminology investigation can go on, because when a university investigation is underway, the person who's involved may not be able to be in a position to respond to us for a variety of reasons, and we have to honor that. But going forward you're right, is that the investigation that we do is separate from will be independent of the university investigation, if only because the issues that we would be examining would often be much narrower than what the university does, and we're also not a party to that investigation and a party to necessarily to the details of the findings that are going on. So what I'm saying, trying to assure you that it's conceivable that the outcome of a university investigation ultimately just might be determinative of what we need to do, but as a general rule, it's an independent investigation, and we're going to pursue our own.
Yes.
Hi. I'd like to kind of bounce off of the previous gentleman's comment and make a kind of a broader comment. I hope that we will use this as an opportunity to do a critical examination of how we as scholars live our values and live our knowledge. This whole situation reminds me, we are the discipline that studies deviance and reactions to deviance. So I feel like if anyone can do this well, it should be us. And I'm very pleased to hear a lot of the policies you're putting forward, but these policies feel to me a bit like a target hardening response, which I think is all well and good, But many critics allege that one of the blind spots of routine activities theory is that it takes for granted that motivated offenders exist. And it doesn't critically examine the sociological reasons why people are motivated to engage in deviant acts in the first place. So I hope we'll take this as an opportunity as a professional community to engage in that much broader, deeper, and more difficult conversation about the sociological motivations to engage in publication deviance in the first place.
Yeah. You saw up there that some of the suggestions were to lead some workshops, have the ethics committee lead workshops into, for instance, the publication process and how to do it properly. Concerns, this is an education issue, it's a training issue, it is a field that's dominated by numbers and tenure and people putting out publications because they want to get tenure, right? And so we need to seriously address that. And there are institutions out there, I know because I've done program evaluations, there are institutions out there that essentially say your merit is tied to how much you publish in a year, not the quality of it, not where it's published, not pushing the field forward, it's a numbers game. And that's at an institutional level. So I think that we need a three-pronged approach, one which is the kinds of things that the board is talking about, but also a recognition that there's an education issue and there's a training issue, and we can actually do something about those things. Yes, Dan.
I think it's important. Your suggestion is an interesting one. It reminds me of John Hagan's suggestion that we think of what are war crimes, is work on the genocide as a criminal act, and think about it as a sociological and criminological event to understand. So I agree with, but it's important in these discussions to recognize that while integrity is one of the bedrocks of scholarly research, but another bedrock or another pillar of it involves challenges to people's interpretations and the way they go about doing an analysis, which have nothing to do with issues of integrity. They have to do with how people, proceed, and do their research. Indeed, in my own dissertation, PhD dissertation, more years ago than I want to think about, I challenged Isaac Ehrlich about the way his research was about an issue of identification. There was a technical argument, but there was no issue of integrity. I mean, there was no claim that Ehrlich was, behaving there was an integrity issue. So it's important in coming up with this that we recognize that there are many disagreements in science which are not issues of integrity, and that we not also, in doing that, frame disagreements as, in many instances, a reflection of the integrity of either of the parties in the disagreement.
Absolutely. I mean, I absolutely agree. We've been thinking about this a lot, and I just as a fact, I didn't know this. COPE has only been around for 10 or 13 years. So I know we're all kicking ourselves for not doing more earlier, perhaps, but this is really an emerging area. One thing that our representative from Wiley brought up is kind of related to this is something that's called a citation cartel. I know we've kind of heard about these things in criminology before, but they have been looking into this in other fields. One thing Wiley is looking into is publishing reviews of articles, and that as well as the response from those authors as well, so that there are ways that they're looking into this in unique ways. And so I'm glad that we're working with Wiley, because I think they're on the forefront of this. So I think this is an important discussion to have, and I'm sure that we'll work with ADP, CCJ, the doctoral programs, and the divisions as well to offer this as an education piece. But we're looking at this in a lot of different ways.
I didn't hear the response to the whistleblower and anonymity, I don't know if you addressed it and I missed it. I think he brought up something about when there's a whistleblower complaint and the anonymity of it.
Yeah, the whistleblower, according to COPE guidelines, can remain anonymous. Can. Yes.
I am not necessarily attached to the incident, the prior incident, and I'm not going to address it here, but I would like to know how the society and the journal editors plan to deal with when investigations are going on at universities, but there is a public war also attached to what's going on, and how the association plans to deal with that the publicity around it, not affecting, university outcomes. Because part of this is if you go public, because the universities, it's a legal process. Everybody understands that, right? You have a job and there's a formal legal process, HR process, attached to this. And so if the public conversation is what's guiding the outcomes, then it's really not fair to the whistleblower or to the individuals that are being accused. And so I wonder if you all have a response in general to that moving forward, whether or not, how COPE, the guidelines of COPE, because I think COPE's guidelines are that it should not be public. That they basically say if you're a whistleblower, you're supposed to stay quiet, and if you don't, there's a consequence to it. But I just wonder if you all can directly address that.
Sally wants me to do this. Like I said, this is a process that we are, even though we've been working along with this for a while, my understanding of the COPE process is that this isn't a public spectacle. There'll be notifications if, for instance, if there's a warning about data discrepancies in an article, that'll be put in the place. With whistleblowers, I do believe you're right that once that comes into play, because we do not know whether there was wrongdoing in any discrepancies. And so the way that the COPE process works is that it protects all parties involved. It protects the authors, it protects the complainant, and it provides the space for the investigation to occur. Whether it is, again, there are different things. If there are discrepancies in the tables or if there's an allegation of misconduct, there's an assessment by the editors as to whether there is some sort of sustenance, and then it's taken to the authors for a response. And if there's an indication that there could have been wrongdoing, it goes to the university or the institution, and it isn't for public forum. Now it doesn't mean that we don't necessarily have control over who speaks where and who posts what, and I'm honestly, this is a new territory for us. The way that things go viral on social media is a really new territory, and it'll be something that we discuss, but there are things that are outside the control of what we can do. Does anyone have any other? No. Yeah. But this is one of the reasons why we wanted to join COPE, was so that there will be protections for the editors, the authors, and the complaints. And also because we care very deeply about the scientific process. And so and this is something that, while it's only been around for 10 years, it's been something. So one of the values of being a member of COPE, not only, everybody can have access to these flowcharts, but there are private forums for the COPE members to talk about ongoing cases, and also there's an archive of previous cases to see how they played out. And so there's a growing learning from experience in all of these. And so this is one of those issues. If there is a social media explosion around an issue, how do other editors deal with this? But like I said, there's about so much that we can have control over, as anyone who's tried to address things in social media may know.
Yeah, but we're going to continue to look at communication as a board about ways in which the procedures can be clear. Again, that's to protect everyone involved. We think if these procedures are more clear and we communicate them, that perhaps we can calm some of these discussions and be more on top of them.
Yeah, we do hope that transparency will help as much as possible.
Yeah.
And also, the society does need to develop a better communication capacity, you know, to respond on multiple social media about what's going on and why and so forth. There's a lot of room for improvement on that front.
And the board will be addressing that particular issue also today.
Sorry to have a second bite of the cherry. You've mentioned a couple of times protections for authors and protections for whistleblowers and protections for editors, and that appropriate procedural protections for all of those people is obviously important, but I'm slightly concerned that we might be missing the importance of protection for readers as well, because the purpose of journals for us as scholars is to publish things, but also the purpose of journals is to be read. And I don't want, as a researcher, to be misled by something that has been falsified. Even more so if I'm a policymaker or a practitioner, and we all, or many of us presumably, want policymakers and practitioners to make use of our work. If they can't trust that the work is, that the stuff that's published in prestigious journals is not falsified, then that, I think, is at least as important, if not more important, than the things that have already been talked about. And it can be very easy in these sort of contexts, as many of us will have experience with things like student complaints or student misconduct, plagiarism investigations, and so on. And it's very easy to get caught up in the procedural, ensuring procedural justice, but that's a necessary thing, but I don't think it's a sufficient thing. We need to think about the wider consequences of this as well. I mean, I'm sure I wasn't the only one to read the Chronicle article comment about there being an editor knowing that there had been other things published in a journal which were, I think the comment was complete rubbish or something, but I can't remember. And complete gibberish, thank you, Kim. And I just thought, if you're from the NIJ, or from a police department, or from the Home Office in the UK, and you read that, well, why would you make any use of research? Why would you even read research? So I think we need to make sure that we're thinking about those broader issues and not just do the procedural stuff is important and it's necessary, but it's not all that we're here for.
Yes, the very issue of access to scientific articles, who reads them, how to put out notices when there is a concern about a particular article, an issue has been raised. So that came up in the board meeting, and we've talked about this and pursued a conversation with both the editors of Criminology and with Wiley. This was before we adopted the COPE principles, about how can we, in fact, give notice to readers, especially students working on dissertations and things, right, where they are citing a journal article that we know is now under investigation. So this is where the statement of concern came up, and Wiley indicated that their practice as a journal is that once a statement of concern, once the article is identified and there's evidence of irregularities, then the statement of concern is linked to the article, and it's a permanent part of the record. And once a conclusion is made in the case, that too becomes part of the permanent record, so that the readers will know, wait, we might want to pay attention to this and come back to it to see what happens in this particular instance, so that there is notification to the scientific community about articles that are currently under investigation. So we have talked about that. I understand your point. I'm not sure, do you have any other suggestions for how we might address these issues?
So I think the narrow issue of how we...
Could you wait until you get on
Yeah.
the mic?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a narrow issue and a broad issue. The narrow issue is for the people involved in the investigation, the publications committee, the editors, to make sure that they're keeping the needs of readers particularly decision makers among readers, be they academic or otherwise, keeping those needs in mind and not becoming solely bogged down in thinking about the process, which is not to say that the process isn't important, but it's not sufficient. I think moving forward, there is probably a need to move to once the reactive processes and policies are in place, there are other fields that do proactive checking. I think Kim Rosmo has looked into this, where they do automated checking, particularly, and this is more of numerical papers than others, but so that they can find anomalies, and those checks are not determinative, and they wouldn't lead to a rejection, they would lead to a question being asked, which is surely a good thing. But I completely see now the focus should be on getting the reactive stuff right, getting the policies right, making sure that next time this happens, and everyone should be clear that there will be a next time this happens, that it is dealt with effectively for everybody. But there's also then, after that's done, you can move to being proactive, and that is something that I think, I'm not an expert on it, but that is a thing that's been done in other fields, and Wiley will no doubt have.
Yeah. So thank you very much for that. I took notes on this. As I said, this is an ongoing endeavor, and I think that your suggestion highlights the important point that we need input from people who have ideas like this. And since we're going to be working on developing this all year round, I'm going to take a risk and offer my email address for you to send these suggestions. So it's not. Could you type my email address into your slide? So it's going to be posted on the slide in a minute. And so we also, as Daniel said, we're going to be, and this won't be as immediate, but we also are going to be pushing to have a lot more open communication and a lot more of an interactive relationship with ASC as a society, and so there will be forums to discuss these ideas ongoingly. If you do email me, please put in the subject line Publications Committee or something, so that I recognize it.
We have another question from over here.
Yeah. That's it, isn't it? That's it.
Thank you. I came a few minutes late, so if this was already addressed, I apologize. But has there been any consideration about the impact on the communities that are being discussed and addressed? Because we've talked about protecting authors and protecting editors and protecting jobs, but we haven't really looked at the impact on the people who are being researched and the communities that are most impacted. And that's something that ASC has to address. And then that's just my comment. My question was more technical. I think I heard you say that ASC is not in a position to engage in a scientific investigation. Okay, so I misheard.
The editors are. The editors are. ASC generally is not.
Is not.
And the editors would call upon members of ASC, depending on the nature of what's needed to investigate it.
So the journal is participating in a scientific investigation.
There are a number of different scenarios, and that's one of them. I don't know how much you heard, but one of the things that we've done is that all our journals are joining COPE, which is a And so there are a series of flowcharts to address different scenarios, and the Publications Committee is setting up a easy way to navigate those. So a flowchart to the flowchart almost is what we'll be doing, but it'll be more nuanced to our community, whereas those are more generic. And so there may be a case for which the authors will respond to an accusation, and depending on the nature of that response, then that response would need to be investigated. And there are several scenarios that I could see being in place, and one may be analyzing the data, giving somebody else to analyze the data. So we as a society have plenty of resources, but editors have access to plenty of resources also. Okay. And so we'll be working to provide guidelines that will allow that endeavor. For sure.
ASC is providing the guidelines, and Criminology is responding with the investigation. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get the
So the
goals
guidelines
straight.
are for editors. And so
Okay.
our journals, which our main journals are Criminology, Criminology and Public Policy, and then also the Criminologist to some extent. They will all be members of COPE, and we're encouraging our divisions to also be members of COPE, which many of them already are. The guidelines will be open for anyone to use if they find them useful, and they'll be available for anyone to look at. And as I had said, we'll be doing this throughout the year, and we know that there are a lot of people who've given a lot of good thought to this, and so we're open to feedback as we do this, and we'll be considering all of the things that people are suggesting.
I'm too lazy to get up again, but you laid out a very broad program at the beginning. I'm wondering if one of the things you might at least think about looking at, though it isn't Gordy or not, is the peer review process, how to improve it, issues related to the peer review process that have been identified in other disciplines that are ethical in nature, and if nothing else, you probably need to have some form of peer review for core agenda.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, that's right, and that is actually part of the COPE procedure, is that and the criminology policy will be to send those out for review. Anything else? I would like your feedback, if I could, on whether you think it would be useful to have a committee on scientific and integrity that's either a standing committee or an ad hoc committee that would be distinct from the Committee on Ethics and the Committee on Publications, because it's my belief that I think there are other important issues related to scientific integrity that are beyond the publication process.
Yes.
Raise your hand if you want to.
Oh, this is great. Thank you very much. You're on my side. I can take this back to the board. Okay. But I also would like some helpful feedback on where you think the landscape is moving forward, where we should be paying our attention. What issues and concerns do you think there are that this committee should be addressing or foreseeing and giving feedback back to us and us to you? Any ideas or suggestions?
Reproducibility.
Pardon me?
Reproducibility.
Reproducibility. Well, we want a committee, but we don't have any work for it.
What was your vision for that?
Well, my idea was that ASC we promote our research by our members in more than just our journals. So there may be issues that are raised at staff briefings, for instance, or there may be issues that are raised when we are under the auspices of ASC presenting data somewhere else, or there may be additional, pardon me? Government, yes, maybe in government contracts. There are lots of places where these things might pop up that aren't just related to our publications per se. So I think it's important that we have a forward-looking committee that understands where the sources of concern might be and how, and giving us recommendations and feedback for what we might anticipate moving forward in terms of these issues and concerns.
I think there's no shortage of issues. You know, there's issues of bias. There are issues of unsupported claims. There are issues of the inadequate methodologies. There are issues, and of course, because the main way the scientific community manifests its work is through publications, there's a huge overlap. So you may want to just have to figure out, you'll have to figure out where to draw that line. But, you know, salami slicing, which the editors of Criminology have discussed in the past, the citation cartels, all sorts of games that get played, and unfortunately, there are implications. There are salary implications. There's
Right.
Status implications.
Yeah, they're incentivized, unfortunately, in many
So
ways, yeah.
there's a lot of work for the committee.
Okay, well, if no one else has any other feedback or comments, thank you so much for coming. This, I think, has been a very useful experience and exercise, so thank you all.